After a week of testimony challenging Arkansas's lethal injection procedure, the state's experts take the stand in rebuttal. Wrong, Mr. Eliot. April was the kindest month in history for the Arkansas Treasury, but may bring flowers. Yet more tax revenue should begin arriving next week with the arrival of a new and legitimate retail store. But first, more conventional economic expansion. A spirited first quarter in Arkansas carries into April. Can we expect still more? Arkansas Week in a moment.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. The death penalty, cannabis, and a record-setting month for state tax collections. All of that coming up. But first, a rapid-fire burst of industrial announcements in Arkansas. Millions in private investment, millions in public incentives, and more than 1,000 new jobs projected. Among the largest, Coors Brews Beer in Colorado. In Benton, a subsidiary makes aerospace components, and a $26 million expansion will result in at least 30 new jobs. In Northwest Arkansas, a $46 million investment by Transplace will eventually mean 350 new jobs in logistics management. In the Delta, the Coca-Cola bottler at West Memphis will add 60 positions after a $33 million upgrade. And some of the construction workers at Southland's $200 million casino project can pause to refresh. Back to Central Arkansas, Jacksonville at the Sig Sauer ammunition plant, 125 new jobs and a $30 million expansion. In the capital city, near the port of Little Rock, a Czech small arms manufacturer will add a $90 million new plant, eventually employing 565. More aerospace, not surprisingly at Camden, a major defense manufacturing center. A $50 million expansion and 140 new jobs at Aerojet Rocketdyne. Back to the Delta and back in business, Dragon Woodland, 75 people at a refurbished milling operation at Helena, West Helena. Those are the major projects in which the State Economic Development Agency was directly involved. It does not, of course, include job growth in smaller businesses across the state. At 3.7% in the latest reporting period, unemployment in Arkansas was one click better than the national jobless rate. With us now, Clint O'Neill, the AEDC's Executive Vice President for Global Commerce. Clint O'Neill, thanks very much for getting in.
Steve, thanks for having me. Yes, sir.
The question, as always, I mean, the additional jobs, wonderful, the investment, wonderful, but there are state, county, and city incentives in much of it, millions of dollars. The question always, did we pay too much? Was this necessary, these incentives?
Steve, I'm so excited about these economic development projects. The ones you read are going to provide great opportunities for Arkansans to go to work. Incentives is always a question with economic development. It's a competitive environment. Private industry expects us to pave the way for their investment. So a lot of what we do with these incentives are we carve out dollars for workforce development. We want to make sure that their top priority, am I going to have a workforce, that answers that is going to be there for them. Infrastructure is another big component of our infrastructure, of our incentives. So we pay for roads to be put in, and we have a variety of other incentives that we put toward every project. But each one is looked at with a cost-benefit analysis to make sure that we have a positive return and that we're being good stewards of taxpayer dollars.
So, in other words, yes. I mean, no, we didn't pay too much.
We don't believe so. We believe that we're good stewards of taxpayer dollars and do all that we can within a competitive environment to win the projects.
So much nationally and globally is in flow. Well, first of all, let me go back and say, what's around the corner? Do you have something? You want to tease us? Give us a hint?
Not exactly, but our pipeline is healthy. I think that the industries that are represented in the 7 projects that you mentioned represent just core target sectors that Arkansas is known for, and our pipeline is healthy with other projects in those sectors.
Fairly broad-based array. The ones that were announced in the first 4 months of this year kind of cover the economic spectrum. Do you anticipate continuing to do that? I mean, in terms of the breadth of corporate America?
Sure. So again, our pipeline is healthy. As far as the rate of which projects close, all of these projects take it's a long sales cycle. An industrial project on average takes 9 to 12 months when a company's doing their location strategy, from looking at real estate, evaluating a community's workforce, talking to the state and locals about incentives, and just taking time to meet with the leadership. So we feel good about what's coming, but you know, the 3 announcements last week and the 7 over the last 6 weeks that we spoke of definitely feels like we're on a roll. I don't know that we can keep that pace, but good things are coming.
A big question mark is the pending Chinese projects. Millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, in fact, in investments. Can you update the status of that?
Sure. We have 8 Chinese projects, which represent all within the last 4 years, represent a lot of hard work from Governor Hutchinson and the time that he has spent developing relationships with key leaders in China. We have incentive programs that are geared toward performance-based, so we've not spent any incentives on some of these projects that are moving at a painfully slow pace, but we have a big project, as you know, Sun Paper in Arkadelphia, that is moving forward with their engineering, with their permits. We feel good about the future of it. TY Garments at the Port of Little Rock already has over 100 people working out there with a good growth pattern, so we feel good about that one. The project Dragon Woodlands that you mentioned is a Chinese investment. So proud to have them in Helena, West Helena, reopening a lumber mill. So we feel like good things are happening there.
The political climate, though, nationally and overseas, I mean, we still have trade and tariff questions pending. How is that coloring it? Does that make it all the more difficult to see where these things are going?
It does make it difficult, and it has put some of these projects on a slower pace. But ultimately, we feel like we're still being successful, in the time that we've spent in China and the relationships that we've built there are paying off.
Oh, and for that matter, in this continent as well, NAFTA, where does that?
Right.
We haven't worked that out. That's still pending.
We haven't. That's you know, in Arkansas, we love trade. You know, anything that opens us up to more trade and exposure to be able to get our Arkansas-made products out is great for us. So we're hoping for good things with the USMCA, and believe that can lead to even more job opportunities for Arkansans.
Your chief executive, Mr. Hutchinson, is known to wince every time President Trump tweets, at least on the matter of trade and other economic issues. Is he concerned, is your agency concerned, that this ongoing turmoil between Washington and, say, Beijing, or for that matter, Mexico City or Ottawa, is going to have a deleterious impact?
We're concerned, and it's something that we're watching closely. But again, the success that we've had with these foreign direct investment projects leads us to believe that it's not taking projects to a halt, that things are moving forward, and that as we work through some of these trade agreements on a larger level, that we can still find success at the state level.
All right, and there's been a lot of rain, and tech and manufacturing tends to be your specialty, but I got to throw a farm question in. Prices have suffered. Do you see a break in that, particularly vis-a-vis the Chinese? They're buying again in some quantities.
We are encouraged about what we're seeing with those some quantities, but it's been a tough season for farmers, and that's something that you know, we work with the Department of Agriculture on, and
Right.
It's something that you know, we'd love to see improvement in that area.
And a further question about the Delta and South Arkansas, what jobs are they're hemorrhaging population, those 2 quarters or sections of our state. Is there any basis for optimism? I mean, you've got a woodland plant over in Helena, or a wood products plant in Helena, West Helena, and a casino coming in West Memphis, and possibly some steel related activity in Osceola.
Right.
Additional. Can you update us on that, by the way?
Sure. All those projects that you mentioned along the Delta, these companies, they have one thing on their mind. It's workforce. Are we going to be able to have the workforce to be successful here? And that's why our top priority as a state, as our agency, is workforce development, is, you know, getting those employees ready for the jobs. And I think that as we can show that we can be a leader in workforce development, that we could recruit more jobs to the Delta. The projects that you mentioned, you know, those are great projects. We want to make sure that those companies are successful so that other companies will come after them.
Do you see any weaknesses, particularly in manufacturing? Nationally, it showed a little growth, I think, in the last reporting period, but there were some signals that perhaps in Arkansas it was slowing.
Right. No, we're very encouraged. In Arkansas, we ranked 6th in the country as far as our percentage of our population that work in manufacturing. In Arkansas, we still know how to make things. And I think that some of these projects are just a vote of confidence when companies are saying we have choices of whether to locate manufacturing capacity and they choose Arkansas. I think that's a strong signal that we're going to be in a good spot when it comes to manufacturing.
And there was a surge reported Friday morning in employment across the country, better than most people expect, or a lot of people anyway, expected. And the Fed doesn't fear any overheating, do you? In the economy, the broader economy.
Right. Well, you hear people talk all the time about we're on the verge of a slowdown, but that's just not what we're seeing in project activity, and the report that came out Friday morning is very encouraging along those lines.
Clint O'Neill of the AEDC, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you, Steve.
And we'll be right back. Back with some other stories now, and a pair of scholars, Michael Hiblin, KUAR Public Radio in Central Arkansas, and Wesley Brown from Talk Business and Politics. Wesley, April was a fantastic month. It always is. April's a high revenue month for the state.
Right.
But this one took off like a rocket.
Yeah, it did. Both on the net and the gross side. The gross revenues, which is a broad indicator because it covers all categories of the state sectors. It was at 958 or 68 million, just short of $1 billion, which is a monthly record for collections, gross tax collections in the state of Arkansas. The net also came in pretty strongly in April. We got 2 months left in the fiscal year, which ends on June 30th. So we're right now at a surplus of about 150 million. And it's you got all the economic indicators across the state are pretty good. The only weakness in the revenue report was a little shortness in sales, but I talked to John Shelnut, who is the state's top forecaster. He said there's no real concern here, just kind of a blip. As you noted, it's April, tax season, sales go down in that month. So across the board, pretty strong numbers. Income tax collection, corporate tax collections are all good. So pretty strong month.
What is the sense in your sources anyway, and the government reports, economic reports? What is the sense going into, third quarter, third and fourth, or be here before you know it?
Yeah, I mean, there were, going into the 2019, there were, I think there was a consensus that you would see some economic slowdown in the second half of the first quarter. GDP report came in last week, it was 3.2%, so that we saw the job reports came in, those numbers were up. So that prediction is starting to sour a little bit on Wall Street and on Main Street. The only real weakness that we may see in the economy is the tight labor market.
Yeah.
There are people that are still, I came driving here to Conway and I saw 2 we're hiring signs. People are having problems finding filling those positions that they need even from the highest level at professional service or high-paying jobs, or to the lower end of the jobs. Wages you're starting to see some wage uptick, but I think most of that is because of a lot of states pass minimum wage standards. I don't know if employees are enticing those employees with real incentives to come in and take jobs. So the real key is, can we fill those jobs? You made an announcement about all the jobs that Arkansas is hiring. It's going to be difficult, especially those construction jobs up in West Memphis in the gaming industry. You're going to need, the construction industry is really struggling to find people to fill those jobs, so it's going to be difficult.
Well, if this is at all sustainable, the Fed had a meeting and said, no, interest rates are okay where they were. So apparently there's no real concern in Washington about an overheating.
Right.
Inflation we're not supposed to have this.
Right. So from the top government levels, from the Trump administration, Department of Commerce, as Feds, as you know, there's not a real lot of concern that things could overheat. And those job numbers, those economic numbers are still not coming down. So and there was concerns about the whole issue with China having an impact, but still you're starting to see, still there are jobs being added despite, and people are still doing business with overseas. So.
Well, as we talked with Mr. O'Neill just a moment ago from AEDC, still in all these treaties, tariff and trade matters are still in flux, including in this hemisphere.
And as you noted, you talked about agriculture. That still is one industry, and especially if that has seen some real downturn over the last couple of years since the Trump administration. So that is one industry that has been impacted and has been affected by these trade tariffs. And as you also mentioned, NAFTA, that still, we do trade with our closest neighbors, Canada and Mexico. So those if those things don't get smoothed out, it could endure some problems in the future as we go into the third and fourth quarters of 2019.
The state has pretty good balance of trade with Mexico. Not the nation, maybe, but the state certainly does.
Arkansas has very dependent, but not on just Mexico, but Canada for trade from the agri all the way up to manufacturing to other sectors. So we do need to get those things smoothed out, and because it will affect, as you noted, the delta in those areas where manufacturing is king.
We got a new fiscal year, as you noted, Wes. We got a new fiscal year right around the corner, July 1. Where does this leave the state? We got tax cuts coming up that are scheduled to come into play.
We've got a new fiscal year. As I noted, we're probably going to have a little surplus to play with, but you also have the state is going through a transformation. Some of those tax cuts are coming into play. So I don't think you're going to see those healthy numbers that we're seeing in the last 2 months of fiscal 2019. I think it's going to get a little tighter going into the new fiscal year as the state has. You see some of those new laws coming in from the legislative impacting the economy. So it's going to be a little different.
Okay, adding to the retail sector, maybe as it's anticipated anyway, I think, Wesley, guys, as early as next week, a new form of retailing is coming to Arkansas, and I think it probably is going to premiere anyway in Hot Springs.
We have our medical marijuana industry probably in the next week or so. You're going to see the first dispensary open in Hot Springs. Probably the first 2 dispensaries are going to come online. The problem that some people are foreseeing is that, are you going to have a mad rush to Hot Springs to buy medical marijuana? The 10,000 people, close to 11,000 people now that have medical ID cards to purchase medical marijuana. Are you going to have this mad rush, and will you run out? The first crop has come in from about 3 cultivators, and it's we don't know if it's going to be large enough, and we're talking crops. It's just like, it's kind of funny to talk about marijuana as a crop, but we're going to have those crops come in the next few months.
Perpetual planting season.
So it'll be interesting. I think you're going to have a lot of media people in Hot Springs over the next few weeks, seeing how this plays out.
Do we have a timeline? There are obviously more dispensaries. pending. You know, we've got, what, 8, I think, districts.
Right, right. Yeah, we've got 8 districts across the state. You know, I've looked at a lot of the applications. Some of those dispensaries are not going to come into the 3rd and 4th quarter, and you know, I think at maximum you may have a dozen in play by the end of the year, or the 3rd quarter, and some are not going to come in line till 2020. So that may pose a problem for you have people in Zone 3, which is in northeast Arkansas. Will they have to travel to Hot Springs to get the marijuana supply? And I don't know if Arkansas has agreements with other states where people can come into the state, but if they do, then that will pose another problem too. So.
Big story in federal court, and Mike Hibland, you've been on it now for 2 weeks. Last week we had testimony against the state's execution, the 3-drug execution protocol. This past week it was the state's turn to defend it.
The state began presenting its side in this lawsuit. You've got 18 death row inmates who are suing the state, alleging that the first drug used in the 3-drug process, midazolam, is not effective at knocking inmates unconscious. And attorneys for the plaintiffs have said that, you know, it's like being poured with gasoline and set on fire when you feel the subsequent drugs, saying that this drug midazolam does not knock inmates unconscious. Well, on Monday, the state began presenting its defense on this, and they brought up their own pharmacologist and anesthesiologist. The plaintiffs also had their own pharmacologist and anesthesiologist, so you had competing, contradicting witnesses that made the case, and the state largely argued that it's not uncommon for inmates to move once, or even people who are being sedated for surgery. Midazolam used to be used quite a lot for surgery to put patients out before surgery occurred. All of this focuses on the executions in 2017, and in particular the one of Kenneth Williams, who, depending on which witness you take, either lurched forward repeatedly or showed an involuntary muscle spasm. A lot of the arguments were about what actually happened with Kenneth Williams. One of the things that was interesting here was that we actually heard from the warden of Cummins Prison. You also had the Department of Correction Director Wendy Kelly. Both were in the execution chamber when these lethal injections took place, and offered a very unique perspective on their side of this. But you had the basically, as said, the dueling experts beyond that about what does this really mean. Thursday we had closing arguments presented, and the state essentially said that, to quote Assistant Attorney General Jennifer Merritt, she said that the plaintiffs have produced absolutely no legitimate, reliable proof to substantiate the claims that inmates suffer pain. The suggestion has been that yes, the midazolam might put them to sleep initially, but then when the subsequent drugs are injected, which include a paralytic, they're unable to respond. They're paralyzed, and suggesting that the inmates are suffering, but you can't see it.
This was interesting because we had Director Kelly, among others, as you mentioned, in the chamber, and her testimony seemed to conflict with those of, including media witnesses who had witnessed this execution.
And part of this
albeit
was,
through a plate of glass. She was right in there.
Right. The media witnesses are in a room looking through a curtain, whereas Kelly was actually right there. Some have described what Kenneth Williams, his response is almost like a seizure, but she said, well, his hands never moved. You didn't see other signs that would be typical of a seizure. She said she did not see any expression on his face when this happened, and she also got somewhat emotional during this. She was very careful in her responses, paused several times, but she was the one person, the sole person in the death chamber who could have halted the execution and if anything went wrong. And she said by the time she thought about it. The response from Kenneth Williams, this lurching apparently lasted about 10 seconds, and by the time she thought maybe I should do something, he stopped.
Obtaining the pharmaceuticals, the drugs to perform an execution in Arkansas as elsewhere is next to impossible almost. There was some brief discussion of alternatives to lethal injection.
Right, and that was something that the plaintiff said to establish during this is, are there alternatives? They brought on one doctor who specializes in helping terminally ill patients in their lives, and there was a suggestion that you could use secobarbital, which is often given to help people in their lives if they want. There was also the suggestion, well, Utah uses a firing squad. Could that be done in Arkansas? It's not set up right now for it, but the plaintiffs made the case that, well, you could easily train, get some skilled marksmen and set up a place where that could be done. But it's in the hands of Judge Christine Baker, and she's expected to issue a written ruling sometime soon.
Got to end it there because we're simply out of time. And we thank both of you for coming in. As always, we thank you for watching. See you next week.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.